My family cut me out of the will, then demanded money. My lawyer ended it fast. I got a letter from Mom one day. It just said, plain as day, that everything was being handed over to Lena. I hadn't even been invited to the will reading. Not a word, not a call, nothing. Then, months later, they all showed up at my doorstep. You owe your family a share, they said. My lawyer stepped out from beside me and replied, calm as ever, not anymore. She handed over the paperwork. I don't even know what cut deeper, losing my mother, or the awful truth that she'd already forgotten me before she passed. But before I dive into all that, let me say this, I've noticed the channel's been slowing down a bit lately. If you're here and you like these stories, hitting that subscribe button is the easiest way to show support. It's fast, it's free, and it really helps keep this community growing strong. I was the oldest of 3. Lena, the youngest, was always the star of the show. The favorite. Then there was Caleb, stuck in the middle, always going with the flow just to avoid stirring the pot. Growing up, I didn't mind living in Lena's shadow too much. I figured life would balance out once we were all grown. I really believed that, thought things would eventually even out. But I couldn't have been more wrong. When Mom got sick, I was the one catching flights back and forth, burning through vacation days, losing chunks of my paycheck just to be there by her side. Lena still lived close. Caleb, too. But they rarely visited. And when they did show up, it was for a photo op, smiles for the camera, little videos for social media. Nothing heartfelt. Just a performance. After Mom passed, I felt completely hollow. Still, I thought the will would bring some kind of closure. Something to show that all I'd done hadn't gone unnoticed. Instead, I got a stiff envelope in the mail from some law office. No phone call, no warning. Just a cold, one-page letter. Per your mother's wishes, all assets and properties are to be transferred to Lena. That was it. There was no explanation, no breakdown, hell, not even a mention of the old lake cabin Mom, and I spent so many summers fixing up together. I sat there staring at that single sentence until the words started to blur. I tried calling the number listed. An assistant answered and told me the will had already been read 2 weeks ago. Lena and Caleb were both there. And me? I wasn't even invited. When I asked why, they said it was because Lena wanted to keep it small and just family. Just family, like I didn't count. I tried to let it go. I really did. I got into therapy. Drowned myself in work. Did everything I could to push past the betrayal. I kept telling myself there had to be a reason. Maybe Mom was confused when she changed the will. Maybe Lena pushed her into it. But months later, the whole thing blew up. One evening, there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it, and there they were, Lena, Caleb, and their spouses, all dressed up like they'd just come from some fancy brunch. Lena was holding a thick folder, and Caleb gave me that same tired, pitying look he always used when he was about to let Lena walk all over me again. Lena didn't waste a second. We need to talk about the house Mom sold a couple of years ago. You bought it, right? I nodded slowly. I had taken over the mortgage and poured time and money into renovating it. It was legally mine, not some hand-me-down. Lena opened the folder and started reading off property values, tax info, and old renovation costs. She claimed that since the house had stayed in Mom's name until the title officially transferred to me, and because Mom had helped cover part of the early renovation costs, it should be considered part of her estate. You owe the family a share, she said. I just stood there, stunned. These were the same people who had shut me out entirely, and now they were acting like I owed them money. Lena actually had the nerve to say that unless I handed over a fair portion of the home's value, almost $200,000 by her math, they'd take legal action. I told them, flat out, to get out. I shut the door on their phony sympathy and entitled demands, but I stood there afterward, hands shaking, knowing deep down this wasn't the last I'd hear of it. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I got a formal demand letter from their lawyer. Lena wasn't bluffing. She was actually trying to say the house I lived in was still part of Mom's estate, and that I had somehow stolen it. But I was ready. I had kept everything, emails, receipts, sale documents, even the contract Mom had signed when she sold the place to me 3 years earlier. Still, I knew paperwork alone wouldn't be enough. I needed someone who could stare Lena down and not blink. That's when I hired Rachel Kim. Not just any lawyer, she was the kind of person who knew how to fight fire with fire. Rachel was sharp as a tack, cool under pressure, and completely immune to anyone trying to twist the truth. Within just a week, she had a formal response drafted, hitting back at every single claim. She backed it all up with specific clauses from Mom's estate paperwork, proof that the house had been legally separated from any of the remaining assets. But the real shock didn't come from the paperwork. It came from what Rachel uncovered next. Turns out, during the last 6 months of Mom's life, there had been a codicil added to her will, a quiet little legal addition that nobody was supposed to know about unless certain conditions were met. And in that codicil, Mom had included a sealed letter meant for me. But I never received it. Lena had hidden it. Buried it, actually. That letter had just vanished, never sent, never mentioned. Rachel wasn't having it. She filed with the court to force a full review of Mom's will, including every codicil and amendment. That's when it finally surfaced. We received a scanned copy of the sealed letter Mom had left behind for me. And let me tell you, reading that letter turned my whole world upside down. Inside, Mom apologized. She said Lena and Caleb had put pressure on her during those last few months when she was too weak to stand her ground. She admitted they'd manipulated her while she was going through treatment. She told me she never stopped loving me, not for a second, and that she always knew the house was mine, fair and square, paid for with my own sweat and money. She even said that the lake cabin, the one we spent all those summers fixing up together, was supposed to be mine, no matter what the legal paperwork said. That letter broke me. It was the first time I'd cried in months. For once, something finally made sense. I hadn't been cut out of her life out of hate. It had been out of pressure, fatigue, and confusion. And now, with that letter and the full documentation in hand, Rachel filed a motion to not only block Lena's claim, but to pursue legal action against her for hiding the codicil. Lena and Caleb were both subpoenaed. You could see the cracks forming in their smug little faces. The confidence they'd walked around with was starting to slip. The day of the hearing, I walked into that courtroom with Rachel by my side. Lena and Caleb looked like they'd seen a ghost. I don't think they ever imagined I'd fight back. Lena gave one more performance, talking about family and fairness, saying it wasn't right for one sibling to get so much while the rest were left with nothing. But then Rachel stood up, and everything shifted. She laid it all out, point by point. The timeline, the legal documents, the sealed letter from Mom, and the codicil Lena tried to bury. She even pointed to a specific inheritance law in our state that covers undue influence when someone pressures a person who's mentally or physically compromised into changing their will. And that's exactly what Lena had done. All those airtight plans Lena thought she'd wrapped up so neatly, they started unraveling right there in front of everyone. Rachel kept her composure the whole time, speaking with the calm, steady voice of someone who already knew the outcome. Then came the moment that shifted the entire room. She turned to the judge and said, "Not anymore." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear paper rustling as Rachel placed Mom's original letter on the evidence table. The judge leaned forward, reading it slowly. His brow furrowed the further he went, like he was watching the entire picture come into focus. Lena, who'd walked in radiating confidence, suddenly looked like a ghost. She reached for her water, but froze halfway, like her body didn't know what to do next. Caleb sat beside her, his leg bouncing under the table, eyes darting back and forth like a kid waiting to get scolded. These were the same people who didn't even bother to tell me when the will was read. Now they were stuck in a room where the truth finally had the floor. Rachel didn't let up. She explained exactly how the codicil had been found, stuffed in a forgotten envelope, tucked deep in the estate lawyer's archived files. She read from Mom's letter, showing how it made it crystal clear that her intentions had been totally different from what the final will suggested. That she had regrets. That she'd wanted things to be divided more fairly, especially when it came to the lake cabin, which Lena had claimed for herself like it was hers by birthright. Then Rachel walked the court through the email records I'd saved, the bank statements, the signed and notarized contract from when Mom officially sold me the house. Every payment, every agreement, every last detail had been documented. It wasn't just the right thing to do. It was bulletproof. Lena tried to jump in. She stammered something about me manipulating Mom during her illness. But Rachel calmly shut it down. She said, if we're going to talk about manipulation, we should probably take a look at the numerous financial transfers Lena received during those final months, most of which line up perfectly with the changes made to the will. The whole mood in the courtroom shifted after that. You could feel the momentum tipping in our direction. Then the judge spoke. He acknowledged that the codicil was legally binding. While it didn't completely override the original will, he said it cast serious doubt on the circumstances surrounding its creation, specifically, Lena's influence over Mom. He even brought up a prior case involving an elderly parent who'd been pressured into making unfair changes to their estate. According to him, if we could show that Mom had been manipulated into cutting me out, parts of the will could be challenged or even changed. Then he addressed the issue of the house. Turning toward Lena's attorney, the judge made it crystal clear, the house had been sold to me well before any changes to the will were made. I'd paid full market value for it, and every cent had come out of my own pocket. He said any attempt to rope the house back into the estate after the fact wasn't just baseless, it came dangerously close to being a malicious abuse of legal process. Lena's legal team looked like the air had just been sucked out of their lungs. You could see it on their faces. They knew that fight was over. And then came the hammer. The judge granted our request to re-examine the estate distribution based on the suppressed codicil. That meant everything Lena thought she had secured, the lake cabin, our grandmother's heirloom jewelry, even what was left in Mom's savings account, was now frozen and up for re-evaluation. Lena shot to her feet. "This is insane," she yelled. She was sick. She didn't know what she was doing. But the judge cut her off mid-sentence. "That's enough," he said. "The court acknowledges the codicil as valid. Your actions in concealing it are now under review. I suggest you consider hiring additional legal representation." Lena went pale like the blood drained right out of her. Caleb didn't say a word. He just leaned back in his chair and covered his mouth with his hand, like he finally realized how far things had gone. After the hearing ended, I stepped out into the hallway and took the deepest breath I'd had in months. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle over me. It wasn't emptiness I felt. It was release. Like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally exhaled. Rachel stood beside me and said, "We're not quite done yet, but it's getting close." Over the next several weeks, the court kept working behind the scenes. Lena's finances were audited. They flagged a bunch of bank transfers that raised red flags, stuff that looked a lot like money used to influence decisions. Subpoenas were issued. Screenshots surfaced from emails and texts. One of them showed Lena bragging to a friend about finally cutting me out. She even said Mom had been too tired to argue anymore. That sealed it. The court brought in a neutral executor to reassess how everything in the estate should be divided. I didn't get it all back, not every last item or dollar. But I got what really mattered. The lake cabin, mine again. Mom's final letter, the one Lena had tried to erase, was entered into the public record. Lena didn't get away clean. She received a formal censure for suppressing a legal document, and while she managed to avoid full criminal charges by the skin of her teeth, her reputation took a hit that wouldn't go away anytime soon. As for Caleb, he did what Caleb always did. He stayed quiet. Passive. A few weeks later, he sent me a half-hearted message saying he hadn't known what Lena was up to. Claimed he thought I'd been told about the will reading and just didn't show. Said he'd gone along with it all because he didn't want to stir things up. Typical. I never replied to Caleb. Sometimes silence is the only response you can give to someone who stood by and watched you disappear, pretending they didn't see it happening. Lena didn't handle losing very well. She took to social media, posting long rants about how the court had been misled, how I dragged her name through the mud, and how I supposedly stole what should have been hers. But most folks who actually knew her saw through it. The truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. There's one comment I'll never forget. Came from Mrs. Halstead, the neighbor we grew up next to. She wrote, "Funny how the only one who never bragged about what they were getting turned out to be the only one who really earned it." That stuck with me. In the end, it wasn't about the money. I wasn't looking for revenge either. What I wanted, what I needed, was peace. The cabin became that for me. I took some time off work, headed up there on my own, and finally let myself feel it all. The grief. The anger. The hollow ache that came from being forgotten by the one person who had once held me most dear. The dock Mom and I had spent one summer rebuilding was still there, solid and weathered. Every morning, I'd sit on it with a cup of coffee, just watching the sun rise over the lake. The water shimmered, the boards creaked under my feet, and in those small moments, I could feel her with me. Like she was still there somehow, in the quiet, in the breeze, in the warmth of the morning light. She hadn't forgotten me. She had just been worn down, too tired to keep fighting. But I wasn't. And in the end, I made sure that the ones who tried to erase her voice, and mine, walked away with nothing but the weight of their own lies.